Today's talk is called The Power of Vulnerability. Interesting title for this day of Memorial Day, don't you think? Because the world teaches what? To be vulnerable is to be weak and a wuss and sissy. Don't let your guard down because the world's out to get you. Exactly the opposite of truth. We just got back from the Brighton Bush Hot Springs retreat that we've been going to for some 30 years up in the mountains of Detroit, Oregon, with about 80 people who come every year, and we co-facilitate there with 5 or 6 other presenters. We've been going there for 30 years, and one particular person who's been coming almost for all of those 30 years is a woman named Rose. When we met Rose 30 years ago, of course a lot younger, we all were, she had a turban on. She was going through cancer. And she became a cancer survivor. She was with the love of her life who was with her through that situation. They had a son together, and then she survived the cancer and survived the loss of her relationship to the love of her life. She's someone who's very powerful. She's able to take herself up and pick herself up and get back in the life that she's meant to live again. She took herself through school and became a therapist. Now she's a top-notch therapist. People were lined up to see her. She's the kind of woman that gets things done. She gets IT done. I seem to be surrounded by lots of those kinds of women in my life. But most importantly, the thing that she is most importantly is an absolute student of these teachings. The bottom line for her is to be involved with the awakening to the truth of who it is that we truly are. So she's sitting in her living room in her house with her son Jesse, who, believe it or not, is already, my goodness, 18 years old. And they have 25 foot, what's that, Maureen?
22.
22? When did he get 4 years older? It happens that quickly, you'll all see, you know that. And the ceilings in her house are about 25 feet high.
Wow.
And while they're sitting there, a hummingbird comes in through the glass doors, and comes in and ends up being up on this very, very high ceiling. And so, of course, you know, Rose is like, we've got to save the bird. Here I come to save the day. So Jesse goes out and gets this 25-foot ladder and goes up to the top of the ladder and is trying to reach for this hummingbird and can't do it. He comes back down again and says, Mom, I can't do it. She goes, well, then I'll take care of this. Rose to the rescue. And she goes up to the top of the ladder and she's reaching to get this hummingbird, and then she falls. The ladder goes down, she slams on the ground, and she breaks her left leg in 2 different places. And at that moment that happened, that she fell, the hummingbird came down on its own, and basically Jesse put a cloth around it, took it outside, then took Mom to the hospital. When she came back, she was no longer the invincible Rose, but a Rose of a different color. And now she's sitting there completely surrendered. She's got to actually, she did an imitation, her hopping around. That's how she got from point A to point B like that, hopping around. She's in incredible condition. But she can no longer do the things that she used to do. Now she's a patient in the ward of her own house. Anybody relate to that? So before she shared her story with us, we passed around these Course in Miracle cards. They're called Blessings from A Course in Miracles. And you know how you always pull the right card? It's the one that you need most to learn. Hers said this: patience is natural to those who trust. She goes, I am the opposite of patient. I cannot sit still for a minute. I'm not patient at all. And so now I have to practice being patient. And so she's sitting there doing her morning meditation. And you know how you always get a redo with life? Have you noticed that? The hummingbird, a hummingbird, comes back in the house again, right back up on the ceiling. And this time she looks up and goes, honey, you're on your own. There is not a thing I'm going to be able to do to help you. I can only sit here and watch you and know you'll take care of it yourself. And so she goes back into her meditation, and while she's sitting there, all of a sudden she hears and feels hummingbird wings coming right down to her face, right in front of her face. And the bird stays there, as if it's asking for something. And so she slowly reaches over, gets a cloth, puts it around the hummingbird, and hobbles her way to putting the hummingbird outside. So there's the same situation, but a different procedure followed to make it happen. One happens from a place of being completely vulnerable, and the other was her trying to make it happen. That's why today I'm talking about the great power that comes from feeling a sense of being vulnerable and open to life. Then life comes and greets you and meets you. Brene Brown, it's so interesting how this happened. I didn't know who she was 2 weeks ago. And then all of a sudden, 3 occurrences happened in a row. Karen Lindvig, the senior minister over at Seattle Unity, said, I just had this woman named Brene Brown at the church. 600 people came to experience her. And normally she speaks in front of thousands of people. This was a small venue for her. And she goes, I really liked what she presented, but more importantly, I liked who she was off the pulpit. That's the most important part. Not what you are on stage, but what are you when you get off the pulpit. And then I heard again from my daughter a TED Talk. Alethea said, Dad, you got to listen to this TED Talk. And it was called The Power of Vulnerability. And it was by Brene Brown. And that's the second time. The third is a charm. I got told the book study group is about to enter into her book. So I went, well, I must be ready to talk about and be in presence of Brene Brown. It says this in her write-up. Brene Brown is a research professor at the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work. She has spent the past 10 years studying vulnerability, courage, authenticity, and shame. She spent the first 5 years of her decade-long study focusing on shame and empathy, and is now using that work to explore a concept that she calls wholeheartedness. She poses these questions. How do we learn to embrace our vulnerabilities and imperfections so that we can engage in our lives from a place of authenticity and worthiness? That's a good question, don't you think? How do we cultivate the courage, compassion, and connection that we need to recognize that we are enough, that we are worthy of love, belonging, and joy? And so as a scientist, she gets things done like Rose, climbing up that ladder to make her attempt to prove this. She decides to interview 500 different people and find out what this thing is that makes people feel like they're loved and belong to something and feel connected. And she noticed when she talked to people and said, well, tell me about love in your life, they immediately told her about where their hearts have been broken. When they would say, well, tell me about belonging, they would talk about an excruciating experience of feeling totally excluded. When she asked them to talk about connection, they would talk about how they felt completely disconnected. She went, what's the theme here? What's going on? As she interviewed people, she found the bottom line for all people is this, that the reason why we hide from ourselves and each other is because of shame and fear. I call it the unholy trinity. Guilt, shame, and blame. Everybody has it while they're here. And people hide because they're afraid. They're afraid that if you knew this secret about me, you'd realize I'm not worthy of belonging or your love. Everyone suffers from this sense of not feeling worthy or good enough. Am I right? Everybody in this room suffers from this. Everybody does. We all have the dis-ease of not feeling good enough. And we hide our imperfections from other people because they might get to know us. If they got to know us, we'd be filled with shame. They would be filled with shame. Shame on you, they would say. But the truth is, we're all in this boat together. And everybody can be open to each other because the truth is, we're really all the same. We may look different, but we're really all the same. So she went on to try to study what this was. And so she then asked the question of people who seemed to feel like they were connected and belonged. She asked them what they had. And they said, one right after another, their bottom core belief was they felt worthy of love. They felt worthy of love. That was the only difference. They felt like they were worthy of that love. I was watching Maya Angelou, who's on...
Maya Angelou. There's no D.
Okay, Maya Angelou. And she was on the Oprah show. Oprah's got the Sunday show going on right now. Hopefully not competing with my time range here, but she's on. And she asked Maya, she said to her, so what is the core belief that you hold to be true for yourself? She said, well, I got my core belief of what I believe to be true. And true for me, the deepest level of being. When I walked into a Unity church many years ago, I walked into a Unity church. And the minister said to me at that church, that God loved me. That God loved me. not because of what I do, but because of who I am. I am worthy of all the love that God is. I felt that because my whole life I've been told from people on pulpits with Bibles pounding it into me that I was a hopeless sinner, that I was not worthy of God's love, that this God in the sky was fickle, in a good mood and a bad mood the next day. This minister told me I was worthy of God's love, that I was God's love in expression. And she said it completely and absolutely changed her life. So from that moment on, even though you still feel sometimes not worthy, you still have shame and guilt and blame, you hold it in the presence of something much greater. So when we say every week here, God is love, I am love, choosing love, feeling love, perception changes. There's a great power that runs through us. It becomes the core belief from which we can then look at our imperfections and not be afraid to be vulnerable with other people who are running around hiding from their own light as well. Do you feel the difference in that? That sense of feeling good enough will be the work to be done for all of us for the rest of our incarnation, to feel worthy of the love that we already are. So being a scientist, she tries to prove it scientifically. Well, what can we do to feel more worthy? Well, she came up with 3 things that we can practice. Courage, compassion, and connection. Say it with me. Courage, compassion, connection. Courage from the Greek word meaning kure, which actually means wholeheartedness. To bring your wholeheartedness, your whole being into the moment. To share yourself completely with everyone who's willing to be open for that with you. To not hide anything from anyone. And that includes your imperfections. Our society is addicted to looking outwardly perfect. It's taking tissue off of this and sticking it into our lips and here and everything. It's got your chest now, you can have big calves. And you look at those people who do that, and they're big, and they've got big lips and whatever else they got, but they're still not happy. And they still don't feel any more perfect than they did before all the plastic surgery. You see, because no outward giving of a gift of perfection to you can work until you feel a sense of wholeness and holiness. Where? In yourself. So having the courage to do that and to embody a sense of feeling unworthy. Because when we don't embody our unworthiness, our guilt and our shame and our blame, to get rid of it, we just project it onto others. So first one is having the courage to live with your whole heart. The second one is compassion. Compassion for yourself, foremost, because we beat ourselves up the most. And then we can be compassionate towards other people. And then we can have what's called connection, a sense of connecting to people. Not just at the highest level, but the level of our vulnerabilities. I want you to know what I'm going through now. With people who have the ears to hear. You don't want to put pearls before swine. That doesn't mean bad people. It just means you want to be careful about who you share your deepest vulnerabilities with, because they may not be ready to hear it yet. But most people are. Most people want you to be authentic and real and vulnerable with them, because it gives them permission to do the same thing for who? For themselves. For themselves. To be open and to be vulnerable. And to share what you're afraid of. Not to increase the fear in you, or the shame or the guilt in you, but by sharing it, allow that thing that is greater than that guilt, shame, and blame to arise in you. What Course in Miracles would call the ego part of us that feels unworthy. To be able to share that honestly is to bring forth the divinity so it can move forth through you and keep saying and smiling through you, "You're my beloved in whom I'm well pleased. You are loved. You are worthy of all the love that God is." I talked to you a few Sundays ago before I left about my childhood growing up, and how when I was young in school, I had undiagnosed slight dyslexia, and I was young, and I was in the slow class. It was called the triple I class for kind of, well, dumb kids. And being in Great Neck, Long Island, and being a Jewish kid who wasn't doing well in school was kind of an oxymoron. But I was in the slow class with the slow students. And I was also the last person to get picked for competitive sports. You take them, no, you take them. Because I didn't feel good enough about myself. I didn't feel worthy. Even though I had the skills, I didn't feel good enough about myself. And it manifested in a time in camp, Deerwood, where I went to camp during that time of unworthiness. And that particular year, my first year at camp, I was one of two people who got picked on all the time in our bunk. It was me and another guy, his name was Horse Manure. Oh. We called him Horse Manure. How awful and cruel we can be to each other. Horse Manure. I was just grateful. I'm sorry, Horse Manure. I know you're not Horse Manure anymore. He's probably, you know, the head of some huge corporation right now, trying to make up for the guilt, shame, and blame that we projected onto him. But I love when he was getting picked on because that meant I wasn't. Our sheets got shorted, the whole bit. You know the whole story. So in leaving that, what I call not my summer of love, but my summer of living hell, I grew 3 inches. And I learned something about myself during that year. I had quick hands. I could throw 3 punches like this and I'm throwing like that, because that's how I fought then, you know. So I called it Richard Levy's windmill, attack, defend, consciousness. And I practiced it that year as I grew 3 inches taller. So when we got to the bus to get on to go to Camp Deerwood again, the usual guy who picked on everybody came and did this little peeing around me. You know how men are with each other. And before he got the words out of his mouth about setting up the hierarchy, I let him know. Down, out, gone. And so now I was on top of the heap. So what did I do with my new sense of being invincible and invulnerable? We found somebody else to pick on. His name was Aaron Kovler. Aaron Kovler. We picked on him. We pulled him out in front of the camp and took all his clothes off, and we had the Polaroid camera. Remember we used to put the stuff on it, that stinky stuff? You know, and we took pictures of him naked, and then we threatened to show them the girls. Mean stuff. Mean stuff. And one particular moment, another brilliant idea from Testosterone Gone Wild, we went on a canoe trip, and we got 2 boxes of frogs. Hundreds of frogs. Put them in the boxes. And then we found Jerry Skelly, Sergeant Jerry Skelly, from the Marine Corps, who was our counselor. We took his fireworks.
Oh, God.
And we blew them up. And when it was done, and I looked at all the carnage all around me, part of my heart broke open. I didn't feel invincible in that moment. I felt very vulnerable. My heart was broken. And part of me said, I no longer want to be a part of this meanness anymore. This is not what life is meant to be. Part of me had a spiritual awakening. I'm not doing this anymore. And we got busted really hard for doing this. The camp called our parents, they were going to take us home, and the sergeant, Jerry Skelly, made us run for 4.5 hours in the middle of the night with our shoes on in the pouring rain, about 45 degrees out in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And as I was running, Aaron Kovler was in front of me. And I thought to myself, he's just like me. Last year, that was me getting picked on. And I made a vow in that moment to no longer keep projecting my sense of not good enough onto somebody else. And Aaron really became a good friend of mine for that moment. I never saw him again, but I befriended him. We didn't get to do any of the stuff that was fun at camp. And last service I said this, but nobody had heard of it. At our camp, I'll preface it, we used to play at the end of our time in camp war games. We called it war. And you had a green team and a pink team and a yellow team, and you got on the team and you competed with each other, and then it was a big board, and it was a really big deal. We were told, you guys are not getting to do anything. In fact, what we got to do instead for punishment was work in the kitchen, clean the toilets, and clean up dishes. And you know what? I had more meaningful connection with myself, being a servant to other people, than I did fighting in the outer war games. Do you hear the difference? When you're able to make that switch in consciousness, a part of me was open in that moment and would never shut down again. I would be able to see other people in ways I had not seen them before, and stop seeing people as enemies and separate from myself, but own it within my own self, to be open and vulnerable to who you truly are in your glory and your ignorance, is to be fully present and alive. to be a blessing to other people while you're in this world. And that's why we are here, to do just that, to be open and vulnerable and not to hide, and to be able to trust in each other. Because at the deepest level, we are worthy of that trust. Yes, that's who we actually are. Another story to close. There was a group of kids that kind of grew up with us while we were at the Brighton Bush retreats. And one of them, many of them, had been in diapers when they first came to the retreat. So now they're 30 years old and they're there with their own kids, which is a sign of a really good, healthy environment. And one of them in particular had been coming to all the retreats since she was young, and I got permission to share this. And for 2 years, we haven't seen her. And what she went into was the darkest, deepest, dark night of her soul, where she almost lost her physical body. It got so crazy for her. She lived on the street for a couple of years, and the worst things that could happen happened to her through choices that she made. And she said, you know, as bad as everything got, as dark as I had become, as great as the darkness was in me, there was a tiny little flicker of light that I remembered from the Brighton Bush retreats, that I'd remember from being at a Unity church, that in the middle of the worst possible thing I had possibly done, a little voice kept saying, I love you. You are cherished and adored. You are worthy of all the love. I felt that love, that assurance that no matter what I was doing, who I was greater than that. It was my rock and my salvation. It became the thing that saved me when my mother took me, got me in rehab for a couple of years, and then she said, I know the darkness. I lived it from 14, 15, and 16. I know it'll always be there, and I'll have to remain ever vigilant for love. But I'm willing to do that now. This came from the lips of a 17-year-old. You hear what I'm saying? Do you realize what we're passing on to our children right now, and how powerful it is to know how loving we are, and no matter how far we wander off into forgetfulness, that love is always with us. So I'll stop screaming and yelling. We'll put the board up, and I'll share with you the power of vulnerability. The fear of being vulnerable lies at the core of all of our shame and struggle for worthiness. Period. Being vulnerable and open is also the birthplace for our joy, love, connection, creativity, and oneness. It sits right at the edge of both. You can't have one without the other. Yes. When we embrace our vulnerabilities and imperfections with courage, compassion, and connection, we recognize that we are enough, that we are worthy, not because of what we do, but because of who we are. Next one, please. When the walls start to surround you this week, and you want to hide or shut down or run up on a ladder and try to fix something that isn't broken, remember these simple practices. This comes from Brene Brown's advice to us, but they're universal teachings. Let yourself be seen. Who do you think you're hiding from anyway? We all know you. You have the same guilt, shame, and blame that I do. That deep secret that you've been hiding from me is the same deep secret I've been hiding from you. It's the total erroneous assumption of our being separate from each other. And it's just not true. We can reveal ourselves to each other, and that which is hidden will be revealed through us. Love with your whole heart, wholeheartedness. Let your heart be broken. Carl Anthony, who was at the retreat, was sharing that, 3 years ago he lost the love of his life, and it broke his heart. He said, my heart is still broken, but something was opened in me at the same time, a kind of vulnerability that I didn't have before. And I said to him, Carl, I'm grateful that your heart was broken so you could open up to share the music that you're sharing now. There's such depth coming through your soul connection to spirit. I'm grateful your heart got broken so you could be open to sharing this great gift with us, which is exactly what we're all doing as well in our own way, because we have a song to sing as well. And finally, be grateful for someone or something every single day. So when you're sitting in your house of consciousness this week and you're feeling a sense of the presence, and all of a sudden you notice, once again, that a situation is coming in the room. Do you hear it? It's the hummingbird. Sometimes it feels like a vulture, or an owl swooping down at you, or an eagle about to rip your head off. You know, the bird that comes in the room, the situation that joins you. Just stay present. Don't try to fix what isn't broken. Don't get up in a ladder and try to adjust it. Just stay in your position, and you'll watch that thing come and meet you. And the hummingbird will become the oming bird. Om, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. And the very thing you've been trying to make happen will be attracted unto you because of your worthiness. Let's close by saying this affirmation together. I'll say it once and you echo it after me together. I'll first say it. God is love.
God is love.
I am love.
I am love.
Choosing love. Choosing love. Feeling love.
Feeling love.
Perception changes.
Perception changes.
This is the thing we are called upon on this Memorial Day to remember deeply. We practice, not just for ourselves, but for the benefit of all beings, and particularly for our children. Namaste.